This is part 2 of my recap. You can check previous parts in the description. In the previous episode, Glenn finished the day's checkups, then healed Lorna, who suffers from a psychological issue, by tying her up and blindfolding her. That surprisingly healed her. After checking on Kay, Glenn, Saphentite and Tysalia visit Illy, the same harpy that had been treated by Glenn back when they had been captured by the bandits. Illy had been refusing to take any kind of treatment from the doctor and refused to show up at the temporary clinic, so the doctor visited her instead. Apparently, after being captured by the bandits, Illy had been unable to fly, which had caused her to lose a lot of confidence. Upon arrival, Glenn quickly checks the girl once again using his sensual methods to get the temperature. He finds out that Illy wasn't sick at all. The reason why her feathers were falling was because she was shedding feathers so that new ones could emerge. Illy is not at all happy with the doctor's assessment. She doesn't want to accept that just because she lost some wings she was unable to fly. The girl rushes out of the house in anger. When Tysalia goes to check up on Illy and catches up with her, Illy reveals that she wants to become a gladiator just like her and fight in the arena. Illy challenges her to a fight, and despite putting up some moves, she eventually loses to the well-experienced Tysalia. During the fight, Tysalia manages to get hold of one of the feathers from Illy, which she hands to Glenn. Immediately, Glenn notices what the issue was. So they quickly gather up all of the feathers that Illy had dropped across town and head straight to her. After catching up with the harpy, Glenn reveals that she was molting, but this wasn't normal molting, which is why she couldn't fly. Illy had the blood of a phoenix in her, which meant that she was shedding her feathers to give place for her phoenix feathers. A few days later, Glenn's assessment turns out to be true, and an elated Illy shows off her new wings and she is able to fly again. When one of her new feathers falls into Glenn's hand, he notes that it is hot, wondering if Illy may be closer to the phoenix than he first thought. For the next few days, Glenn and Saphentite hold a few seminars in the village to help them understand the proper etiquette of how to take care of their wings and claws. When the time arrives, Naya meets Illy. She just wants to stroke her feathers, one stroke or perhaps even Glenn had asked Saphentite to go as she was a cold-blooded monster and all alone. Realizing the win, Saphentite and Glenn sit down for a drink. She tells Glenn she loves him. Saphentite tells him that he doesn't have to reciprocate the feelings as she knows he is very busy. Just then they are interrupted when they hear tremors coming their way. The whole village gathers outside in fear as they witness the giant goddess Gigas marching towards. They don't know what they have done to anger the goddess and are willing to accept their deaths at her hands. However, Tysalia refuses such a fate for herself and her friends and takes charge to get everyone to work together to evacuate the village. The faster flyer Illy is sent to Lindworm Glenn's town to speak with Lady Scaddy. Glenn and everyone else gathers their belongings and decide to head back to their town before the goddess can approach any further. But as they leave, they realize that Tysalia was nowhere to be found. The Mite Centaur had sneaked off to face the giant goddess alone. Tysalia thinks that if she can slay a literal goddess, there is no way Glenn would refuse marrying her. It all seems stupid to fight a goddess just to get a guy. There's some major reverse simping going around here. Saphentite and Glenn manage to get to her just in time to stop her from making any bad decisions. Just as they start to leave, once more the giant catches up with them. The first thing that the giant does is sneeze so hard that the entire area of the forest rumbles in the breeze. The goddess was apparently sick. She introduces herself as Dione Nephilim and had been approaching the village because she had heard that a doctor was there who could treat her. Our super doctor's unconventional and sometimes very inappropriate techniques have managed to spread so far that now literal goddesses were asking to meet him. Glenn checks up on the goddess and finds that she has a simple cold. He offers the giant goddess some medicine and also asks Aranaya to make some warm clothes for her so that she wouldn't be walking half naked in the cold, and decides that it's time to head back home now. After reopening the clinic, Glenn and Tysalia meet up for dinner, which Tysalia thinks is a date. She starts explaining how she had wanted to risk her life for him, but just then Saphentite arrives as well to clear her confusion. The fight for Glenn is on like wildfire, with perhaps every other monster girl wanting his attention. The next day, everyone arrives at the Marrow Waterways for the commemoration ceremony, where Glenn notices something wrong with Scaddy's tail. As Scaddy is giving a speech, she passes out in front of everyone. As soon as she drops to the floor, Glenn and Saphentite rush to the scene to give her preliminary aid, after which she is taken to the Lindworm Central Hospital. Glenn and Saphentite visit the hospital later on to know what exactly the situation was. Even though they gave Scaddy preliminary aid, since they weren't her physicians, they had no idea about her pre-existing conditions. Immediately upon entering, Dr. Cthulhu becomes way too close and personal with Glenn, much to Saphentite's anger. Cthulhu stops and then explains to Glenn and Safi that despite her resilient dragon physiology, Scaddy has a rare condition that will eventually kill her. She has dragon cancer or something. The case however wasn't so simple as Scaddy has no interest in being cured. She wants the sickness to spread and eventually kill her. The case was too complicated for even her to handle. Later Kanai confronts Glenn and requests him to help Scaddy. Once he is inside Scaddy's room, Glenn hears Scaddy's voice for the first time and finds she has the appearance of a young girl. Scaddy reluctantly agrees to be examined and reveals a change in altering her blood flow. She believes it is karma for her This regret is the reason she doesn't want to get treated. She wants to die knowing that her death would end once and for all the sins of her family. Regardless, Glenn Fentite, the preparations for the heart surgery finally begin. Everyone is ready for this to have a crush on the doctor as well at this point. It's not even surprising. She lacks a lot of confidence walking beside the doctor and ends up stumbling. She gets stuck in a knee people there she ends up slapping the doctor thinking he saw her in a questionable situation. When they finally reach the boss, Glenn reveals the situation and gives him the list of items that he would need within the next month. The surgery would be done after that. They accepts the contract but tells him that he cannot promise anything about the needles as he lacks the materials to do so. Glenn tells him that everything will be provided by the hospital. Upon hearing this, Kuklo gives the job to Meme. At first she thinks that she will fail and everything will be blamed on her, but Glenn manages to convince her. Elsewhere, Aranaya is at the clinic where she practices for the surgery with Kanai. Meme works hard and is continuously working on the project that has been assigned to her. She ends up working to the point of exhaustion and is brought to the clinic after passing out. Had found a new method to make stronger and thinner needles. She then shows everyone her new plan, which earns her praise. After this, Glenn heads off to once again convince Scaddy to have the surgery, the only task that was now remaining. It's funny how they still don't have the patient but everything else is ready. Glenn arrives at the central council hall to convince Scaddy to have the surgery. Meanwhile, Safentite, Aranaya and Tysalia have not a care in the world and decide to have a girls' night out at a pub. The three girls end up drinking so much that it's late at night by the time they return home. When they return to the clinic, Safentite catches Aranaya stealing a dragon scale. Attempting to flee, she is stopped by Tysalia and Safentite. Rather than turn her into the authorities, as every sane person would do, Safentite and Tysalia have a heartfelt conversation with a surprised Aranaya. Apparently Aranaya had fallen in love with Glenn as well, and even though this doesn't really explain at all why she stole the dragon scale, the girls decide that the explanation is enough. Back at the council hall, Glenn catches up with Scaddy where she once again explains why she refuses to have the surgery. However, Glenn tells her that she deserves to live a happy life and convinces her that the sins of her ancestors had nothing to do with her. She deserved to let go of those sins because she had no part in them. Scaddy accepts this finally and decides to have the surgery. Uli, Safentite and Aranaya operate on Scaddy, while all of Lindworm holds a vigil hoping for it is alive and doing well after the surgery. After recovering and resting for some time, Scaddy finally manages to arrive at a ceremony for the first time since the surgery. She addresses her people and tells them with a smile on her face that her life was now out of danger and she was doing well. Life can now return back to normal and Scaddy can also now return back to her duties much healthier. He asks her to get dressed. Scaddy gives 2 barrels of wine to Glenn and Meme for their help. Glenn asked Meme if she can stay there and wait for him as he must go to the patients. Some time passed and Glenn returns to the Meme. After that, Kay, Lorna and Tysalia joins them as they were going to the clinic. Later that night, a party takes place in the city with Glenn bringing back home with him all of the girls that he had treated so far. Safentite is once more angry that they can't have some alone time together. Life is truly normal, at least for Glenn, as several girls flock to his side as they always do. Write in the comments what girl you like the most. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and like this video to make me happy. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.